Tammy wasn't listening to me. I had just gotten back to my car after checking out and paying the bill. When I handed the manager my room key across the counter, he ignored it. Instead, he stood up, walked to the wall behind his desk, and flicked a switch. A red glow flashed on the walls. I turned around thinking it might be a police flashlight, but he was the one who turned on the flashing vacancy sign. Our room must have been the last one available, and now that we were done, the manager was trying to rent it out twice in one evening. The next thing he did was pick up the phone, pressed 2 numbers, paused, and then said, "Doreen, number 3, urgent." Only then did he return to the counter with my bill. After paying and walking back to my car, I saw the maid's cart already in front of the open door of the room where Tammy and I had spent the last hour. I got in the car, thanked Tammy for a wonderful time, and told her how good I had been with her. As usual, she didn't listen to me because she was completely engrossed in her phone. It was the same on the way back to the motel. It was as if our time bonding with each other was only a temporary distraction from her endless texting with her friends. I tried to make my words sound sincere, but really I was only pretending. I felt relaxed and satisfied because she knew how to push my buttons and make me finish. In return, I usually gave her a few good, blissful thrusts. There was nothing more to our relationship than that. As I finished my nonchalant expression of gratitude, I saw another car quickly pull into the parking lot not far from my car. I wasn't worried because most of the lights in the motel parking lot had burned out, and I carefully parked in a lot so dark that no one could tell what color my car was, let alone see my license plates. The new car was parked almost directly in front of the office, so it was flooded with white lights, accented by a flashing red vacancy sign. I saw a man get out of the car and quickly head into the office. While I fiddled with my keys, the man walked out of the office. He checked in almost as quickly as I did. His passenger, a woman, got out of the car and ran toward him. As she did so, she swiveled her head in all directions. She reminded me of the first time I met Tammy. I was looking around just like she was now because I was scared to death that someone would see me. Tammy, on the other hand, cared about nothing but getting revenge on her unfaithful husband. I sank down in my seat, watching the woman. I knew I was in the dark and she couldn't see me, but there was no point in taking any chances. The woman stepped into the streak of white light. The vacancy sign flashed bright red, and her worried face was clearly illuminated. My heart stopped. It was Helen. 2 seconds later, they were at the room door. The maid had already left. My wife entered the room and the door closed behind them. My first impulse was to jump out of the car, break down the door, beat the man half to death, and drag Helen by the hair to my car. But I pulled myself together and took a deep breath. I looked at Tammy to see if she'd seen anything. She was completely engrossed in her phone. When I calmed down, I got scared. My throat constricted. I felt like someone was choking me to death. These were my physical and mental reactions to the realization that I could stop Helen before she cheated, but if I did, it would destroy our marriage. I started the car because I didn't trust myself. If I stayed there, I could do something I would regret for the rest of my life. I quickly drove to the mall where Tammy had left her car. As usual, I parked a few rows behind. She sensed the car wasn't moving, looked up, saw where we were, and opened the door. Bye, bye, bye. A second later, she disappeared from my sight. I looked around the parking lot and saw no one. I screamed, and then I couldn't take it anymore and burst into tears. I pounded the steering wheel so hard that my hand hurt. I wanted to bang myself on the head, too, hard enough to chase away the thoughts that were running wild in my brain. I don't know how long it was before I calmed down. I didn't look at my watch, but I knew I had one less question to ask now. The maid didn't have time to change the bedding, so she probably just draped over the top. By this time, Helen was already drenched in the dried sweat that Tammy and I had left there. I choked on the thought. I forced myself to put that image out of my mind and think about what would happen. What were my options? I could go home immediately, pay Mrs. Reynolds, and send her home. I could have a couple drinks before Helen gets home. When she sees my car in the garage, she'll have time to rehearse her story before she comes in. I know roughly how it's going to go. She needed to buy something at the mall. I wondered if it was the same mall where I had parked. Should I drive around, find her car, and wait for her? Helen is a careful planner like me. She's probably bought what she needs in advance and keeps it in her trunk. The purchases are in her trunk in a shopping bag. Later that evening, when he drops her off at the mall, she'll go inside with her bag and walk around a bit, hoping to meet someone she knows so she'll have a witness that she went shopping there tonight. Then she'll walk with her bag to her car. That's what I'd see if I happened to find her car and caught her by surprise. She'd be surprised to see me when she got home because I told her I had to work late and wouldn't come over until she was asleep. I wondered if she called me at the office to check on me before she left home. It didn't matter because my rear was covered. If my phone switched directly to voicemail, she knew that meant I was talking to a client after hours. There was no one else in the office to chat with. After my dates with Tammy, I always rushed back to the office and worked alone for a couple hours. I would wait for a call from Helen that she was going to bed and then leave after a while and drive straight home. No need to go back to the office tonight. I don't think Helen will call me from the motel. What should I tell her when she gets home? Should I try to confuse her? I could start by asking her what she bought. Was she at the mall where my sister works? Had she seen it? She certainly wouldn't look haggard and sweaty. She'd shower and look fresh as a daisy for Mrs. Reynolds' sake. Suppose I were to look into her eyes. What would I see? As soon as I thought of that scene, I realized it would never happen. I never asked her about shopping. Maybe I could get away with a one-time question, but after that, Helen's antennae would go up. I shuddered as I imagined how things would play out. What started with me questioning her would end with her questioning me. She wouldn't rest until she knew what was on my mind. I would try to keep quiet, but it would end the same way it always did. She'd find a way to make me tell her everything. She would confess and explain to me her reasons for deceiving me. She would probably admit that they weren't good enough. The only reason good enough would have been revenge, but that wasn't it. If she knew I was at the motel and intended to get back at me, she would have walked up to my car holding a man's hand and spit out my window before entering the room. She would also turn around at the door and give me the middle finger before entering. If I started breaking down the door, she would call the police and let me spend the night in jail. No, she had no idea I was there. She was there for herself. Why? Wasn't I enough for her? She never seemed unsatisfied in bed. If she wanted something special, she always told me. It was rare. Helen was usually optimistic and positive. She always had a smile on her face. I tried to remember if there was any indication that she was dissatisfied with me. Suddenly, it hit me. About a month ago, she asked me if I was getting bored with her. I immediately and forcefully told her how crazy that sounded. She was and always will be the most exciting thing in my life. Now it was like being struck by lightning where that question came from. It wasn't resentment, it was disappointment. How many times had she been left disappointed? I remembered a couple, but there were probably many more. She was in a great mood, but I was tired. She never criticized me, but she was disappointed. She once remarked that I used to demand so much love that it made her tired at times. But now she seemed to want it more than I did. I told her that wasn't true. Hadn't I proven how much I desired her every time we made love? But she sensed something was wrong. I was working hard, playing with the kids, doing things around the house like I always did. But now I had an extraneous concern. Tammy. I'd never thought about it before, but I was having as much sex as I always had, maybe even more. The difference was that now there were two women providing it, so one of them was getting rejected, getting frustrated, and doubting herself. Helen is as beautiful and sexy as any woman 10 to 15 years younger. I was sure she was occasionally molested in the office. Since I no longer courted her the way I used to, she probably had second thoughts about her attractiveness as a woman. This made her vulnerable to the attentions of someone who took advantage of her weakened defenses. Once she decided to give in to him, I'm sure she made preparations. She thought through shopping at the mall or came up with another scheme that was even more foolproof. She knew that Mrs. Reynolds only babysat for a few families and was available on short notice on most weekdays. Just as Tammy had done, she'd probably researched all the outlying cheap motels so she and her man could drive from one to the next until they found an available spot. Once she finished making the arrangements, all Helen had to do was wait for the next time I called her and told her I had to work late. That was this evening. After she finished talking to me, she called her suitor and then Mrs. Reynolds. She was sure she'd be home long before me, but even if I happened to come home, she must have had a plan to envision it. She never envisioned me leaving the motel at the same time they were checking in. How was she to know that her treacherous husband had decided that no one would be hurt if he helped Tammy get revenge on her husband and then proceeded to fuck Tammy for no reason other than she was different and a little different from Helen? She certainly wasn't prettier or a better lover. I liked Tammy, but I had no special feelings for her. There was no reason for my affair. Why was I only seeing this now? If I ran into Helen when I got home, she'd cry and I'd cry. She would confess everything, and I would confess everything. We'd forgive each other and promise never to cheat again. And from then on, we would live unhappily, at least until the kids went off to college. That would be awful for Helen. But I wasn't thinking about her right now. I was selfishly thinking only of myself. I would be destroyed. Why? After all, she had cheated and I had cheated. We were even. The scales were balanced. Not quite. I'd get a double whammy. I'd always be haunted by the image of Helen furtively glancing around the parking lot as she ran to the door to get into the same bed Tammy and I had been in moments before. But there would be something a million times worse. Her eyes. The admiration and adoration that had always come from them would be gone. Her love for me was so strong that sometimes I could feel it radiating warmth. It made me glad that I was alive and that I was her man. I gave thanks every Sunday for being blessed to be with her. Once she knew what I had done, Helen's eyes would no longer see me as special and different, the best husband, father, and lover in the world, as she liked to remind me. She would be able to put on a show for me and the kids and our family and friends, but I knew there would be many times when we were alone and she was tired, she would let her guard down, and I would see the pain and sadness of losing her complete confidence, security, and trust in me. That's why I would have to divorce her as soon as the kids are gone. Alone, I wouldn't be able to look into those eyes every day. She idolized me, and I took it for granted. I took her for granted. Every time her eyes would show me what I had messed up, it would be like a stab in the heart. No, it doesn't have to be like that at all. She'd never know what I'd done or what I knew. Her life will be better than ever. No matter how much money I had to leave on the table, I would be home for dinner every night from now on. I didn't take many business trips, but that's all behind me now. We don't need the money that much. I'm going to stick to her like glue so she won't even think about leaving me again. She's going to get more sex from me. I won't stop until she tells me she's in too much pain to continue. I'll count how many times a month I've made her finish, and I'll try to break the record as often as I can. We'll do things together that we've never done before. One night, we're going to sit down and write wish lists and work on them together. It will shine through. For a moment, I wondered if Helen would ever regret her infidelity, enjoying her charmed life with a husband she considers faithful and our wonderful children. Probably not if she's like me. When I was with Tammy, I never thought about Helen. I knew she would never know, and what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Helen will probably feel the same way. I am her happy, faithful husband, and she is my devoted wife. Since it only happened once, it meant nothing. If she has any guilt, she'll let it go, making it up to me in weeks or months. Eventually, it would all fade from her mind, and she could forget it ever happened at all. But I don't. I already know that no matter how hard I try to put it out of my mind, I'll never forget the night she walked into the room after me.